Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, June 11th, 2020. Time for another show, and plenty to launch with today. Of course, it's Thursday. Today will be the last of the live programs of the week. As you know, I have to be candid about this in order to promote the practice for everyone. When it comes time, get your colonoscopy, and that's what we'll be doing tomorrow. We're not going to broadcast it live. No one wants to hear anything about how it actually goes, except for the fact that it actually is happening. And hey, if it's time for you to get one, then it's time to stop procrastinating and sign up and make sure you get it. Take care of yourself. Even in the middle of the pandemic, yes, the ambulatory surgical center is open again and performing procedures like this. How fun! What a fantastic place to go. I'll go all masked up and everything. This is the second time I've been in one of the ambulatory surgical centers during the pandemic, which is really unusual, I think, and has made the experience just that much more interesting. You get kicked out before you're fully recovered from the anesthesia. They want you out of there as soon as possible for your own health. You may remember that, what are we coming up on, about 3 months ago? Just under 3 months ago that I had to do the hernia repair surgery. That was an experience all by itself. And now the added fun and bonus of having the person that comes with you to drive you back and forth because you've been anesthetized, but also, a little bit of moral support while you're there and waiting. They now can't wait with you. They sort of drop you off at the curb, kick you out of the car. You're brought in. You go through your check-in and your procedure, etc., anesthetized, and then as soon as you, my recollection from the hernia procedure was, oh, you're awake. Good, the anesthesia was wearing off. Get the hell out of here. So I guess that's what's coming for me on Friday. Daily Coast Radio is live now because it's only Thursday. Kagro X, that's me. Hi, how are you? Reports that President Trump has finally agreed to change all the Confederate named military bases. They will now all be named after McDonald's combo meals. Yeah, that's probably on the agenda for today. Thanks, Bill, for waking us up with that one. We had a great time renaming military bases yesterday, but that's all old news. That was Trump tweeting about the movement yesterday, tweeting yesterday about the movement to rename our United States Armed Forces military bases that are named currently after Confederate generals, which is kind of a weird thing to have done. They were the opposite side. They were traitors. They lost. The base is for the soldiers of the army that won. But, whatever. Something, heritage, not hate. Lots of things going on that front. Also, Nascar, which is not actually a governmental organization, as it turns out. I looked into this. NASCAR also banning the display of the Confederate flag at its races, which is, I guess, a place where it gets displayed fairly frequently. You could imagine that that's the case. I don't, I can't verify it for you. I've been to a NASCAR race, but it was in Pennsylvania, for one thing. That matters. There's Confederate flags all over Pennsylvania now, too. But I don't recall taking specific note of the display of the Confederate flag there. But I imagine it's a fairly frequent phenomenon. They've had one driver in the minor leagues of NASCAR, I guess as you might refer to it, one of the truck series drivers say, oh, he's going to quit. So we'll all miss that guy who's not racing in even the famous one that you'll see on TV. He's on the not so famous ones that you see Saturday night, the night before, the ones that they show on the major networks on Sunday. Anyway, okay. So that's what's going on that front. Statues continue to topple. The Jefferson Davis statue in Richmond has been torn down and was left lying in the street and then disposed of rather ignominiously, I guess, by a tow truck. A flatbed tow truck showed up and wrapped the cable around it and hauled it up onto the truck and took it to I don't know where. I mean, we'll find out a little bit more about that today. And this morning, Trump is awake and tweeting about, he's got a rally coming up, so he's tweeting about that. And he was tweeting about what a great job his, presumably, Secret Service did in clearing Lafayette Square Park the other day, making it very easy, or he was, as he joked, a walk in the park, haha, in shooting at, American protesters. There's a lot on that front. We'll get to that. But, he's praising the National Guard, who we read about yesterday. They're a little conflicted about what they had to do there, and there's lots more writing on that if we get around to that story again. But praising them, praising the D.C. police, and the Secret Service, which he helpfully abbreviates for all of us. So thanks, shout out to the brave men and women of the SS who helped him clear the square. A lot of people offering him the tip that maybe that isn't the way to abbreviate the Secret Service. That's in favor in this country. But, I guess this is all part of the build-up to his rally coming up very shortly. And, I think that's on the agenda with Greg. So I can leave that story to him. I've seen it mentioned in the morning's patented, trademarked Raft O stories. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. We're doing just fine.
Okay, good. That's we have to start from a healthy position here.
Right.
It's clear diet day for me. So
the summary I got this morning in my mailbox from Bloomberg News is actually pretty good. It's a one paragraph, so might as well summarize some of the more important things here. NASCAR banned the Confederate flag the same day President Trump said military bases honoring Confederate leaders won't be renamed by the way the Senate Armed Services Committee think they will. The loss of the flag will trigger pushback from some NASCAR loyalists, but open the sport to more than it loses, said T. Bettina Cornwell at the University of Oregon.
What does she know?
Trump will restart campaign rallies on June 19th in Tulsa, the date that marked the end of slavery and the site of one of the worst massacres of black people by whites in 1921.
Hey, weird.
So, that guy that you were mentioning, the truck guy, is going to quit NASCAR. Looking him up, apparently he was really fond of coming in 43rd a lot.
Aha. Well, does that mean anything?
I don't know what difference it's going to make or if anybody's going to notice,
George
but there
W.
you have
Bush
it.
fan, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like when Chachi says, "Hey, I'm not going to make any more movies."
Okay, I gotcha. We'll get over it, I think.
I'm over it. Okay, already over it.
He can go into the international racing circuits.
Right. Meanwhile, tons of polling out, none of it good for Trump.
Oh.
And, I wrote this morning on Twitter that Trump, St. John's Church Bible photo op really, retrospect, did not go well.
Is the Bible speaking out against him
any
now?
more than gassing peaceful protesters did. So naturally, he's doubling down on it this morning, as you pointed out. But, the point I'm trying to make is they thought it was a tremendous win, and obviously Trump still does.
Yes.
Which is a good argument for why he's losing and going to lose.
Well, yeah, I guess if you do the things that the vast majority of people think are terrible and say...
And think it's a great idea.
More of them. Right. Oh, that was...
So I'm going to do more of it. So why not pick Tulsa for this? I mean, obviously it's no accident, and Stephen Mills is going to write the speech, and they think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I guess they keep saying they do. At some point you have to believe them. They lie about everything, but that one, I guess I don't know. Maybe they're lying about that too. And it's not just a great idea; it's the greatest idea. And I'm lying by saying.
Harry Enton this morning. Here's the fact: Trump's reelect. Okay, I lied. It was last night. Here's the fact: Trump's reelect is in tremendous trouble. No serious analyst I know believes he's anything but an underdog. His chance of winning is something like 1 in 4 or 1 in 5, based on history. It's quite possible he pulls it off, but it's bad.
Okay. All right.
Okay. And Nate Cohen
That's good. I mean, it's bad.
puts, I think, the piece that is often missing in analysis about Trump's chances. Well, his numbers never move. Well, they're going down. Yes, but they're going down. But they could come back up, too. And everybody knows that you always rally. And so, by the end, it's going to be really close because 2016 and shut up.
Huh.
Well, okay. So Nate Cohen says, look, it's worth keeping issue salience in mind as we mull the deterioration in the president's standing as well as his prospects for a comeback. Right now, the campaign focus is on coronavirus, criminal justice, protest, race relations, handling crises. Not his campaign, the campaign. That's what Americans are looking at.
I see.
These are not issues, he says, where the president has ever fared well in the polls. And as long as the campaign and public is focused on them, Trump's going to have a tough time. Trump's relative strengths right now are not as relevant. He still does better on the economy. Barely, I would add. And even though he had these so-called wonderful job numbers that weren't that wonderful because people aren't feeling it, Nate Cohn says that's under the radar. Among non-college whites, I'd guess he's still strong in immigration, but those issues aren't salient right now. With that in mind, I don't think it's terribly surprising that Trump's polls look quite mediocre among older voters and white no-college voters, but look pretty okay among Hispanic voters. If the campaign focused on immigration, that'll change. That might change quickly, is what he says. That will change, is what I say. And while it's easy enough to say that no one's views of Trump change, there's always been a big chunk of voters who have a series of conflicting views, liking him on the economy or immigration, telling it how it is, disliking his personal conduct, healthcare plans, divisiveness, and I would add how he handles coronavirus.
Oh, yeah.
If you're thinking about what a Trump comeback would look like, I think a prerequisite would probably be a significant reordering of issue priorities in public debate to something that plays to his strengths. I would guess, Nate Cohn says, that Team Trump just doesn't have a vision for how Trump is supposed to prevail in an election that's focused on how to fix coronavirus and bring America together if it's a referendum on Trump. That's just not what Trump brings to the table. I would guess that Team Trump's vision, if he has one, would be to disqualify Biden Clinton 16 style, but it's quite evident that for now Trump doesn't have any cards to play that might disqualify Biden and reduce him to a polarizing, unpopular Clinton 16 type contender. Remember, that took 30 years.
True, it was a long-term project.
This leaves Team Trump with few options. Improve his standing on the issues that Americans are focused on right now. That's impossible. Hope for changes in the news to refocus the debate to things where you're strong. He isn't strong on anything. Or hope for serious Biden missteps, news that brings him down. Now, that might happen, but it's like totally random. So the first and second points here, Nate says, could plausibly go together. For example, if COVID essentially went away, it could both reduce its salience as an issue and could lead some voters to reconsider whether Trump did so bad on it or not, or at least whether it was so bad as to matter. And that hits a point you've heard me say multiple times, which just I still scratch my head. I don't quite get it. Okay, people sit down and start doing political analysis and say, okay, let's put coronavirus aside.
Okay, let's do that.
That's like saying in 1941, well, let's put World War II aside and let's talk about what's going on here in my local election. You can't put it aside. It's dominating. And it's not going to go away. In fact, we have southwestern states that are spiking right now. And the idea that, well, yes, but you don't know, it could go away tomorrow and then everything would change is what we call wish casting. Yes. It's not going away. It's not going to change. And there aren't that many months left.
What if
We're less than 5 months away. And early voting starts in 100 days. What kind of analysis suggests that it doesn't matter because I want to talk about these other things? Because I don't know anything about this, but I know about these other things, so let me talk about that. And that's what a lot of this political analysis is.
Okay, so that was right. I thought I was kidding, but no, it's true. That's exactly what they do. You're right. Didn't mean to interrupt you being right.
Of course it's not going away. It's going to be the issue, and he's doing terribly on it, and therefore why would you think there's going to be a comeback? Because the longer it goes on, the worse it's going to be for people, and people can see that that's the case. The fact that you have increased deaths and increased spikes is only going to highlight that you did not take the proper steps in the beginning when you had the opportunity, and you cannot get that back.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even know that they were trying, but okay.
Well, they weren't.
Oh, well, all right. They weren't trying to do anything.
They should have tried.
Yes, and as it turns out that they had possibly, according to the genetic research into the virus's path through the United States, they may have had a few more weeks than they originally thought to actually get something done, and still didn't do it. But we knew that it's just a different timeline of failure, and perhaps a more intense failure, but a failure pretty complete nonetheless. So that narrative hasn't changed, and I guess it's sinking in.
Yeah. Oh, well, but the stock market's coming back. Well,
that's true.
Not necessarily. The Fed just said, you know what, this time frame is through 2021. And so the idea it's all going to get better by October is ridiculous. So the futures aren't so good today for the stock market. But the stock market has nothing to do with real life.
That's definitely true, or at least it doesn't.
If we're up to the stock market, nobody would have a job because it's all an expense. People are an expense, you know.
Let's get rid
you
of
and
all.
Your stupid salary and your benefits, you're costing me a fortune.
Right. If you would just work for me and let me have the benefit of your production and stop asking me to give you things, business would be fantastic. And why do you hate creating jobs anyway?
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
So this is the AP, which takes a more centrist view of all of this. Analysis: as U.S. reckons over race, Trump becomes a bystander.
Okay. All right.
At a moment of national reckoning over racism in America, President Donald Trump is increasingly becoming a bystander. He wasn't in the pews of churches in Minneapolis or Houston to memorialize George Floyd, which, by the way, remember, is still striking that a president isn't invited. Of course he wasn't. They don't want him there. But the fact that they don't want him there is a big deal. The black man whose death sparked protests across the country. You know, Obama sings Amazing Grace, and Trump tweets nonsense. And, okay, that's a comparison. He hasn't spoken publicly about the ways Floyd's death during a police arrest has shaken the conscience of millions of Americans of all races, and he's dismissed the notion of systemic racism in law enforcement, repeatedly putting himself firmly on the side of the police over protesters. In doing so, Trump is leaning into many of the same personal and policy instincts that helped him draw support from disaffected, largely white Americans in 2016, yet he appears to be falling out of step with the growing majority of Americans, including some of his supporters in politics, sports, see NASCAR, see the NBA, see the NFL, and pop culture, who see Floyd's death as a searing inflection point in America's fraught racial history. This not only raises questions about Trump standing less than 5 months from Election Day, but also defies expectations that American presidents in the modern era, regardless of their political party, will advocate for equality, particularly during moments of racial turmoil. And that's one of the things. I can't take credit for this. I saw somebody else write this, and it went by so fast I can't give proper credit. I'm sorry. If somebody knows who said it, let me know. But when you're looking at things that are divisive, like abortion or gun safety, and compare it to this, those things went up, went down, people cared, they didn't care. A week after an event, it was a big deal. 7 months after the event, not so big a deal. The difference with this, and the reason this takes off and keeps going and growing, is because this one, unlike the others, are about equality under the law.
Yes.
And that is one thing that people on both sides of the aisle, conservative, it doesn't matter, what your political orientation, at heart, you feel that being treated equally is good, important, and necessary. Remember, when you're claiming as a conservative to be the victim all the time, it's because you're claiming that you're being treated unequally and unfair.
Yes, they do still mostly cling to that.
But the point is, they believe in fairness.
Sort of.
Otherwise, you couldn't take that stance. Otherwise, it wouldn't work.
Yeah, unless you're a complete
you may interpret it wrong,
lunatic,
but you believe in the concept.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
and
the idea, or you think others
going
do.
to the heart of the concept. That's why so many people say, yeah, I mean, this is something that's like really important. And that's why it's not going away.
All right. Yes, I mean, I think at heart, it's the one thing that most of them are still genuinely embarrassed to either, if it happens, admit that they don't believe in. Because so many people have been raised to believe that, so that's the core American value.
Yeah. I'll deny racism because we're an equal society. That's what makes America great. We are, exceptional.
That's the usual escape clause for them. Right. And I don't see color, that thing, because
that's because a colorless society is the ideal.
Yeah.
Because an equal society is the ideal. Mm-hmm. And this is on video. You can't deny this. And so, sure, you can find 20%, 25% of the public who denies it. But that's not the majority of people, and that's why this is playing the way it is. And so what does Trump do? He says, okay, fine, I'm going to change all of that. I'm going to make my followers, fight the tides here. Charlie Pierce writes, I think having your first rally in months on Juneteenth in Tulsa in our current moment,
yes,
while this is going on, is the on-brandiest on-brand thing the president has ever done.
Yes. That seems clear, although I'm not certain he understands exactly why it's
Well, I'm sure he doesn't even read. Charlie referenced something from the Washington Post, Tulsa searches for mass graves from a deadly 1921 race massacre. The article I sent you is from the History Channel about the Tulsa race massacres.
Okay, thank you.
And there's a lot to be said about what happened there, but, just in covering what's going on here, it's pretty clear Trump knows none of that history and doesn't really want to learn.
Right. All just coincidence. One of his very bright staffers told him it's just supposed to be nice weather there on that day.
Again, the same people who thought that photo op was so good.
Yeah.
And were delighted about how it went and made a campaign video minutes after.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, talk about bad judgment. It's just right there.
Yes.
And so, a reminder that Trump isn't the only horrible person in the White House. It's like true. Everybody else.
Of course. Right. Well, he's a very dim bulb, and he's got some. I think some people who understand these things better around him. They just are intentionally doing this, and that's a bad sign. But
right. So he tweets: Radical left Governor Jay Inslee and the mayor of Seattle, who's Jenny Durkin, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Are being taunted and played at a level that our great country has never seen before. Take back your city now. If you don't do it, I will. This is not a game. These ugly anarchists must be stooped, S-T-O-O-P-E-D.
What?
Immediately move fast.
I see.
So,
okay.
Stoop the violence.
I wasn't sure. What's he going here for? Stopped or stupid? This must be, stopped.
I don't know,
okay.
But Mayor Jenny Durkin tweets back, make us all safe. Go back to your bunker. And that's the end of it. I mean, that's all you have to say to him.
Okay.
He's become a pathetic figure, and what he's trying to do with this law and order stuff, with this, grass-growing maintenance, is not working. It's just not working. It's not going to work. So let's look at some polling here and some other things.
Well, inspect it.
G. Elliott Morris tweets, Trump, and again, this is last night and has more to say about it today. Trump has his worst job approval ratings in over a year. His deficit versus Biden in general election polls is higher than ever nationally and growing in swing states and is well beyond the margin Biden needs to win the Electoral College. This is not a close election right now. And then this morning, he's partly responsible for this. He tweets, The Economist with their Electoral College model, Economist forecasting model for the U.S. presidential election is now live as of this morning. We think Joe Biden has around a 5 in 6 shot at winning the presidency.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's the electoral map as we start a year in earnest. The model thinks Joe Biden's favorite to win about 331 electoral votes come November, with Texas being ever so slightly red, Florida being ever so slightly blue, Ohio, Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona up for grabs.
Okay.
Even without any of those, he still has 331 votes, which gives you an idea where things are.
Oh, okay.
And then he talks about why his model's special and why he likes it, and that's all nice.
Special.
But the point is, there's a long time between now and the election. You can see that early in the year, the model would have given the candidates a much closer to 50-50 shot. When the facts change, the model changes too. And that's what people have to do. They have to adjust their thinking. It's not 2016. And right now, Trump is clearly behind.
Yeah.
Now, polling. From Nick Gorovich.
Gorovich
does the Navigator survey.
Last chance. Right.
Every time Trump yells law and order, just remember he's losing the debate. Ask the question, which side do you agree with more? Those who say that Donald Trump is only making things worse through his words and actions, dividing the country, pitting Americans against each other, and using the police and the military against people? 55% agree with that. 57% of independents.
Well, that's one position. I see.
Right? Those who say that Donald Trump is standing on the side of law and order and is right to be using the military and the police to end the violence, rioting, and looting taking place in cities across America, 39. Now, that may be 78% of Republicans, but 16% of Republicans agree with the first part. And independents agree with the fact that Trump is making it worse, 57-32.
All right. Yeah, great. I was going to say Tom Cotton is in that group, but I think maybe Tom Cotton even isn't in that group anymore.
By a huge margin, the public believes race relations have gotten worse under Trump, including 77% of African-American voters, 68% of Hispanic voters, and 48% of white voters. Trump hugely underwater relative to Democrats and issues relating to race and police accountability. A number of people have asked me, Nick Orovich, whether people even know what Antifa is. 44% of voters aren't familiar with the term. And the data suggests it's largely a GOP construct. Only GOP people who answered the poll know what it is.
Well, that's an interesting phenomenon. We've seen that before.
They get it from Fox News,
they
but
get
nobody
really
else knows what they're talking about.
Right. And they make these things. I mean, there is such there's a thing that people say, it's a word, and people adhere to the ideas in some cases. But yeah, the idea that there's corporate headquarters, no.
In a 2017 Quinnipiac poll, by the way, let me just ask you a generic question here. So you have this thing, Antifa, and nobody really knows what it is. Do you think that matters in terms of this, having it have significant election consequences that nobody knows what it is?
Mm-hmm. What?
Do you think it matters?
Do I?
Given the fact that nobody knows what it is, do you think it has significant electoral
nothing matters.
Yes or no, right?
So,
is that a no?
I guess so.
Okay. Well, then why would it matter if nobody knows what defund the police means?
I don't know, because Democrats, maybe it's Democrats, maybe not.
Like Democrats wet the bed about it all the time.
Yeah,
that's
right.
Why.
Right, okay. Well,
when you don't know, it doesn't matter, is my point.
Okay. Yeah, right. Well, that's true. Most people really won't. And it's a good reminder, and people always say, Twitter's not real life, and that's another case where it isn't. So don't worry about it too much.
Negative reaction to Trump when we get back.
Okay. Why wait? Here's one. I hate Trump. What about you? 1% of me polled says that.
100.
Okay, right. 100. Yes, that's the number I was looking for. Not one. Okay. Well, we'll be right back in 2 minutes or one, depending on how you look at it.
What day it is?
Yeah, right. The last day ever. Okay, we'll be right back.
Well, yesterday we didn't do it.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue on into our second segment here. Greg Dworkin's still with us, and plenty more to get through, but where do we want to dive back in here?
Well, I want to finish the Nick Orovich
of course.
Polling here,
and
then just
Nick,
maybe a further comment on some of the stuff we were talking about during the break. Negative reaction to image of Trump holding up Bible at St. John's Church. Remember, picture's worth 1,000 words, and video on cable is worth 1,000 images. A majority of Americans say they have a positive impression of various images related to the protests.
Okay.
3 in 5 Americans say an image of Trump with the Bible in front of St. John's Church gives them a negative impression. So they give some examples. Here's one of cops kneeling.
All right.
With the protesters. Positive 87, negative 13.
Okay.
Okay. And a large crowd of protesters, all of them wearing masks, positive 75, negative 25.
All right.
This one is an image of black protesters, positive 63, negative 37.
Are they wearing masks?
Not all of them, no.
Maybe it's about the masks.
Maybe.
Yeah. And economic anxiety.
And then we have a group of protesters with masks on one side of the picture. The other side are face shields, except this time it's the National Guard in their riot gear.
But they are face shields.
But they are face shields, positive 54, negative 46.
Okay. That's actually the coronavirus
and similar
tests.
in terms of confronting police. And then they have the picture of Trump holding up the Bible in front of St. John's, positive 41, negative 59. So when you read the commentary, the longer we go, the worse that photo op looks for Trump. You know, people just don't have a positive reaction to it, and they're pretty upset about Bill Barr and the gassing of peaceful protesters. And that's getting to be more and more of a scandal because they lied about it.
Yeah.
And then they went ahead and they used helicopters.
Oh, right, yes.
Right? That part, Josh Marshall captures that. There was a New York Times story. Ryan McCarthy, the Army Secretary, acknowledged that he gave the order for the helicopters to respond, but by the time that order reached the pilots, officials said, it was interpreted as high profile and urgent to disrupt the protests. Officials expect the pilots who flew the helicopters, there were two of them, will receive some type of punishment. So Josh Marshall said, trying to understand that paragraph, my best stab at it was, quote, I gave the order, but later realized it was really screwed up, especially after everybody got mad, and we know from history that I was just following orders as no defense, so it was the pilot's fault.
Yeah, I mean, but the pilots were, of course, following orders. All right, that's a weird, that was a very strange incident that we really haven't discussed very much, but all right. Well,
which the Pentagon is looking into, and that's part of the reason I think that all of the Pentagon people who are writing, I'm not following illegal orders.
Yeah, right.
We are not going to do this. We're not doing this again. And they made that pretty clear.
Well,
and for them, who are supposed to be apolitical, that was a pretty big statement for them all to make.
Yeah, if they're actually doing it. I am not positive that they are doing that thing, but they are putting out that statement. It's a good idea to at least cause some confusion about whether you'll follow illegal orders by saying you won't.
Now, here's how it's playing in the White House, who, again, keep patting themselves on the back for being so brilliantly. This is from ABC News yesterday. As Trump struggles to respond to crises, internal polling instills fear in advisors.
All right.
Some advisors say the president needs a course correction before November, but here's the problem and why he's going to Tulsa and why he's going on Juneteenth. Okay. 1 week ago, President Donald Trump met with advisors from his 2020 re-election campaign who greeted him with bad news. The campaign's internal poll numbers show the president down in swing states and down with key demographics of voters, including women and independents.
That's their slogan. Down with key demographics of voters.
Exactly.
Including
the
women and
messaging
independents.
from the White House on the coronavirus pandemic and the growing anger about the brutal killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis was fueling a drop in his numbers. Top aides warned that former Vice President Joe Biden, now the presumptive Democratic nominee, was positioned to defeat the president by a significant number of electoral votes based on the campaign's analysis. According to multiple sources familiar with the meeting, they came up with the same thing the economists came up with, I suppose. Okay?
Yes.
Now, some of the president's advisors insisted the current campaign internal poll numbers aren't relevant, engaging Trump's re-election chances this far. Others, among his most loyal and longest-serving advisors, have developed a new posture, one of increasing alarm. They fear without a course correction and quickly Donald Trump could lose the 2020 presidential election. He's actually in the process of losing it.
All right. That's good.
Okay. Yes. And then they spoke to 17 people. What they say is some White House officials have been lobbying the president to give a formal address to show he was taking the death and growing protests seriously. Meadows was in favor. Meadows believed it was a moment for the president to deliver a message of unity. Others, like the president's son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner, were against such an address, arguing it could do more harm than good. He's probably right about that.
Yeah.
So he's decided to do it in Tulsa instead. A source close to Kushner disputed the categorization, saying instead the goal had been to announce a policy initiative that will have an impact.
Yeah, okay.
So that's why he met with Tim Scott. And there was a picture released by the White House of him meeting with some African-American leaders in, quote, listening sessions.
Right.
And so it was a picture of Trump, and about 15 feet away from him on one side is an African-American leader.
Yes.
Generic.
Lots
right?
of social distancing.
And then 15 feet on the other side of him is another African-American leader, generic. They're so far apart you can only get two into the picture.
Yes. True.
Right? And then somebody saw the picture and said, now he's doing social distancing.
This time he really believes in it, right?
Right.
He's done it
A person who has attended similar events as a guest of the president previously told ABC News they heard from a White House official to be on standby for an event with the president that nothing materialized for. Trump is not capable of showing empathy here, said the source, who's still a loyal supporter, which tells you everything you need to know.
Right, true. He's incapable of empathy, and I love him.
Right. But the thing that struck me, actually, despite what I told you already,
Why did you tell me this?
It's deep buried in here.
Yeah.
Is a growing chorus of Republican advisors believe Kushner is alienating the president's voter base because he's too moderate.
All right. Well,
that's the thing that struck me.
He's always privately
He's going to Tulsa, and he's doing it on Juneteenth because they think that Kushner, in pushing for prison reform, has alienated his base, and they have to make a less moderate statement.
How interesting.
That's not what the article says. That's what I'm inferring from that statement.
Okay. Well, that is, I mean, it's interesting because they love to tout that as a huge achievement, and they've not been afraid of what it might do to the base. I think they just assumed the base didn't understand it. So
Fox News host Tucker Carlson said last week that, quote, nobody has more contempt, end quote, for Trump's voters than Kushner, taking him to task over his support of a program to let more criminals out of prison and back on the street. Carlson was talking about the First Step Act, a largely bipartisan criminal justice reform bill that sought to reverse some of the excesses of the drug war, mostly by granting relief to longtime convicts with nonviolent drug offenses. And White House sources and outside advisors have echoed that sentiment. They're telling us he's too moderate.
Okay.
Right? One White House source said Kushner, quote, assumes our base is going to go along with anything we say, and accused him of intentionally driving the president in the wrong direction. And, of course, Kushner pushed back with a source saying, that, everything we do is perfect, right? So we're smart and you're not.
Good. Okay. Keep fighting.
Trump has also felt stuck in the White House, and advisors claim he's antsy to get back on stage and speak to the large crowds who gather for his political rallies. And so I'm telling you, he's getting pushed by people who say you're far too moderate. That's why he's bringing back those people from the 2016 campaign for the 2016's greatest hits. They're telling him he's too moderate. They're telling him Kushner's pushing him to be too moderate. And so he's going to go to Tulsa, and I just don't think this is going to end well.
All right. Well, as long as it ends.
Yeah,
I guess.
That would be nice.
Right. There's always the chance, something goes crazy, falls down the stairs or whatever. But,
So you mentioned that, and I think you covered it yesterday, the aggressive tactics by National Guard ordered to appease Trump wounded the military, too, about those National Guardsmen who were really upset about doing what they needed to do.
Article, but similar.
But the one line in the article, again, in context of what we're just talking about, one point everybody has agreed. The first days of June, a calamitous period for the Trump presidency, have been a debacle for the National Guard.
A calamitous debacle. That's true.
I mean, I mean it. It didn't go well.
Yeah, it didn't. And the article that we read
a disaster.
Yesterday, they pointed this out, and I'm sure it's going to be made in this article too. Is that the particularly the D.C. Guards people, I suppose, mentioned they used to have a terrific image. I mean, who had a negative image of the National Guard really lately? And lately, when the D.C. National Guard has been seen, it's been for coronavirus response and disaster relief, and they have a lot of goodwill. That a lot of them were saying
building hospitals like really fast with the Army Corps of Engineers, stuff like that. So what happens? Senior Army leaders, according to this New York Times articles, in an effort to prevent what they feared would be a calamitous outcome if President Trump ordered combat troops from the 82nd Airborne, holding just outside city limits, to the streets, leaned heavily on the Guard to carry out aggressive tactics to prove it could do the job without active duty forces. So Guard leaders issued a flurry of ad hoc orders that put thousands of Guard troops in face-to-face conflict with fellow Americans. Some of the Guard troops were just out of basic training. We made this point last week. Guard troops aren't trained to do this any more than the Bureau of Prison riot police are trained to deal with the average populace. That's not their training. You can't just all of a sudden, oh, well, I have a uniform. I know what to do. That's not how it works. Some of the Guard troops were just out of basic training, and others had no experience in controlling disturbances in the streets. Troops were allowed to drive heavy vehicles on the streets without the usual licensing, et cetera, et cetera. And in the next days, the Army is expected to release the results of a preliminary investigation on why the helicopters, a Black Hawk in particular, Lakota with the Red Cross emblem, designating it a medical helicopter, came to be used to terrorize protesters in Washington. And we now know it's because the Secretary of the Army ordered it.
Okay. Well, that's an easy answer. Why did you
and
do
that's
that?
where that paragraph comes from, that he ordered it, but by the time the order reached the pilots, it was interpreted as high profile and urgent to disrupt the protests.
Yeah. Super.
Okay. The D.C. National Guard didn't respond for comment. Mm-hmm. So it all went wrong, and now everybody's pointing their fingers at each other, which is the best way in Washington to know that it went wrong.
True.
And, somehow or other, Trump's going to reverse all of this because he's going to say one thing or Biden's going to say one thing that's going to change everything. And that's why I keep scratching my head and saying, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
This is done, and it's bad, and you can't undo it. And the pandemic is bad, and it's not going away, and you can't undo the lack of attention to it before except for repeating it now.
Yeah.
You can't undo it, but you can redo it, and that's what they're doing.
True.
It's terrible. And they're pretending it doesn't exist, and it's not going to end well. And somehow or other, but things are going to tighten because everything's going to what? I'm just looking at the analysis and saying, guys, get a grip. Do you not know what's going on? Open the window and look outside.
I guess. I don't know. I'm not certain what drives it. I mean, if to give them the benefit of the doubt, which I don't really know why I should, I find it a lot easier to believe that, say, Biden will make some kind of crazy mistake. Certainly easier to believe that than the idea that Trump will find magical healing words.
We've been doing this since Biden was down before South Carolina. Yeah. Of course he's going to. Why do you think it's going to make a difference?
That's a better question. And I guess that, only thing you can point to there. Well, there's been some really wild volatility in the polls of late. The polls that never moved have moved. But I don't know.
They moved
really
only in one direction.
Pull all these things together and say, yeah, that's right. Yeah, but every action has an equal and opposite reaction, as you know.
Well,
it's the laws of
but that's the way it's always worked in the past.
Yeah, right,
and I study things that used to be, and so you're asking me to do new analysis.
True, and then of course, if you say historically, though, it's never happened that way, and then you say, 2016, so that's history always proves it, except for that one that didn't, but that's now part of history, and so therefore.
The one with Jim Comey, that will never happen again.
We should have torn down the statue of 2016 so that everyone would forget that history.
I'm looking at the trackers, just for guidance here.
Yeah.
Because they've been pretty good about giving us an idea of what's going on. And I'm sending you the MSN tracker, which is actually pretty amazing when you look at it.
All right. Okay? Let's see. Holy mac.
What happened back in April 26th. Trump was at 40% approve, 57% disapprove. Then it got worse. Somewhere around the beginning of May, or a month later. Okay. And on June 4th, Trump was 37 approve, 60% disapprove. Not tremendously different.
Yeah.
But these tracking polls, let me tell you, on June 4th, June 5th, June 6th, June 7th,
yeah, that's interesting.
June 8th, June 9th, and June 10th. For one full week, they have not moved at all.
That's really...
Our train tracks, straight line, like with a ruler.
I've not ever really seen that before.
Neither have I. If you look at the rest of the polling there, they bounce up and down at least a little bit.
Yeah.
It's 37-60, and they're not moving.
That is weird. Because we keep referring to them as the poll that never moves, and if you go long term, I see what you mean.
But this one is similar. But all the polls are train tracks like that. This is not a volatile election like 2016, and so expecting things to go the same way when all the data is telling you it's different is crazy.
Where does that begin? On the 3rd, June 3rd, and it just locks 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th. 11th today. How do they know? I guess it's yesterday.
Well, the 11th is reported of what happened yesterday.
Right. Okay. So really through the 10th. So what did we say? The 3rd through the 10th? That's a solid week.
Yeah, it's a solid week of not moving. And so, we were talking about, the violence is going to help Trump. Really? Yeah, well, you don't see it yet, but you got to wait a Really?
Yeah, you have to wait 2 weeks on everything. And you need 60 votes to get coronavirus. All of these things, I think, are always universally true.
Unless you change the rules.
True. I always.
We're looking at this and saying there is just no evidence that any of this is helping Trump. And the economy isn't helping Trump. And the jobs report on Friday isn't helping Trump. And his visit to St. John's isn't helping Trump.
No.
And I would predict, I know I'm going out on a limb here, going to Tulsa on Juneteenth and giving a speech and a rally isn't going to help him.
Yeah, probably not. And, well, this will be real interesting, too. And now, of course, we'll have to set a timer for 2 weeks after June 19th to check in on the coronavirus rates in Oklahoma as well.
Yes.
And northern Texas. Can't leave them out of it. And Texas could very well feed that. Okay. But, don't let Don Jr. set your timer. Apparently, he's got difficulty understanding the incubation period on this thing. He was out tweeting yesterday that all of the spikes being reported are obviously due to the protests, but we haven't had enough time.
And all the epidemiologists are saying, obviously, they happened even before the protests.
Yeah, like when you opened too early around Memorial Day.
Exactly right.
Okay, well,
so that's the background.
Yeah.
That's what's going on. And by the way, while all this is going on, just every day another video surfaces of another cop beating up somebody inappropriately.
Sure.
This one was Maggie Haberman last night. I can't breathe, Oklahoma man tells police before dying. I don't care, officer responds.
Oklahoma. Well, Why would that be relevant? Can you grab the tweet there and send that along? I'll park that in the summary for everyone to see. I'd like to see that one, and just keep track of these things. There's actually a great somebody's been doing a great service of compiling all of these things as they come out too. And
it's like 400 examples or something.
Yeah, it's crazy, and they're very well indexed. And I'll see if I can't come up with that note to self here. Right.
So Lord Salatin, Will Salatin, makes a point here and says to everybody who complains that years of police reform accomplished nothing, body cameras are a reform, and body cameras are why we have this evidence.
Yeah.
That's not quite true. We have some of the evidence, but a lot of the evidence is coming from cell phones, and that's why we have it in panoramic. Because don't forget, a lot of these officers forget to turn it on.
Right, yeah. Which, originally was supposed to be sort of automatic evidence of guilt, but they've kind of thrown that one away.
Well, they may have to bring that one back.
I guess so. Well, rules get thrown out all the time. I mean, good luck finding some place that limits itself to 50% capacity, for instance.
This morning, Chairman of Joint Chiefs says he shouldn't have accompanied Trump to the photo op at St. John's Church and suggests he was misled about the walk. The general believed that he was accompanying Mr. Trump and his entourage to review National Guard troops and other law enforcement personnel outside Lafayette Square.
It's possible. I mean, it's a good excuse.
And also, they were going to see a bathroom.
Right. And also bring a gas mask.
Something like that.
Okay.
All right, that's what I'll leave you with. The rest is up to you.
All right.
Good luck with this endeavor should you decide to take this mission.
Right. And if I
this
don't...
This tape will self-destruct and be unavailable except if you listen to podcasts.
Okay. Right. True. All right. And I never did find out. Nobody complained yesterday about why did you guys keep talking into the break. I mean, the break probably happened and they were like, they screwed up. But the podcast had what should have been the lost 2 minutes, but maybe something about Justice's machine allowed us to talk right through it. But a very special bonus episode yesterday. I was able to tout it as a bonus episode.
Yes. So, of course, when you say they screwed up, you mean I screwed up.
Well, me. I didn't set the alarm. I don't remember when these breaks come up. My phone tells me.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I didn't turn that on. So, but yes,
well,
absolutely your fault. 100%.
Transparency, I wasn't paying attention either.
True. Okay, and I'm just going to go with that. In the interest of expediency, this is all on you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Right. Alrighty, take care, and I'll talk to you on Monday if we're still here.
Yes, I hope so. Thanks very much, Greg. Appreciate it. And it's a tough day for me today. All the clear liquids today, and looking forward to fun tomorrow. Yeah, actually, the anesthesia should be good.
All right, that's the end of the show. Gotta run.
Yep, that's right. Oh, very funny. Okay. We'll see you on Monday. Thanks, Greg. All right, let's see where to go with this here. Do I want to start with the Twitter cache or the Pocket cache? Ooh, Pocket cache. That does sound pretty good. Here's a COVID-19 story I wasn't expecting. But I've been waiting for more follow-up on, hey, what about all those young-ish people who had tremendous damage to their lungs from COVID-19 but didn't die and so therefore weren't part of the breathless, well, that's a bad word for something that just happened to people's respiratory systems, but the breathless coverage of the death tolls, etc., in COVID-19. But I've been wondering about this, and the New York Times has a partial answer, just to sort of keep you up to date on the peripheral medical stories here. COVID-19 patient gets double lung transplant. and interesting, in the rest of the headline, it says, offering hope for others, which is an interesting way of looking at a double lung transplant. I mean, I guess it's better than not having any hope and dying because your lungs are so damaged. But, it's not like you can just go to the lung store and I'll take 2, please. Where those lungs come from. Somebody else has to die. And presumably they're a non-COVID-19 excess death. But still, it's... What a strange way of putting it. But okay. Subheader here says the operation is believed to be the first of its kind in the U.S. Is it a double lung transplant? That can't be what they mean, is it? The patient, a woman in her 20s, had been healthy, but the coronavirus devastated her lungs. So the police kicked the crap out of the coronavirus, I guess. Would have been a nice thing to do. But they didn't. Let's see. Denise Grady writing this piece. Published this morning in the New York Times. I'm just kind of interested in this. Maybe we can skim a little bit of the top of the article. A young woman whose lungs were destroyed by the coronavirus received a double lung transplant last week at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago. The hospital reported on Thursday the first known lung transplant in the United States for COVID-19. I imagine that had to be the case because, well, I think we've been able to do that for a little while. The 10-hour surgery was more difficult and took several hours longer than most lung transplants because inflammation from the disease had left the woman's lungs, the originals, completely plastered to tissue around them, the heart, the chest wall, and diaphragm, said Dr. Ankit Bharat, the chief of thoracic surgery and surgical director of the lung transplant program at Northwestern Medicine, which includes Northwestern Memorial Hospital, in an interview. Always giving the titles of people in medical positions here. It takes 20 minutes now because you got to get all the naming rights correct. But wow, what's the medical term for it is, that's gross, I guess, to hear that. Sorry this happened to this woman. I don't mean to belittle it, but wow. Inflammation from the disease had left the lungs plastered to the tissue around them, stuck. What a weird, you gotta replace those. And, of course, gotta get I've never heard of that as a complication for a lung transplant. No wonder that was so difficult. Having to somehow pick out and dispose of the old lung tissue because it's stuck to things. It's one thing to do a replacement, but holy cow. I don't know. I don't have a lot of experience replacing lungs. Maybe that is common. And those of you who are thoracic surgeons can chime in and tell me about that. But wow, he said the patient, back to Dr. Bharat here, said the patient, a woman in her 20s, and I think we said that perhaps in the subheader, yeah, but that's still surprising. Woman in her 20s who had no serious underlying medical conditions. There you go. Not her fault. Was recovering well. That's good. She's awake. She's smiling. She FaceTimed with her family. And that's pretty good. But she has a long way to go, as you might imagine. She is still on a ventilator because even though the transplanted lungs are healthy, her long illness has left her chest muscles too weak for breathing. And it will take time for her strength to return. A little freaky there. Wow. So left her chest muscles too weak for breathing. So it's like, almost like polio, the paralysis. It's not paralysis, but I guess just the atrophying. Had she been on a ventilator for a long time, so wasn't doing her own breathing and therefore didn't keep the muscles in shape? Is that the idea? The transplant was her only chance for survival, Dr. Bharat said. His team wanted other transplant centers to know that the operation could save some desperately ill COVID-19 patients. But it's not like you can just say, all you got to do is replace their lungs and they'll be fine. It's not like I said, not like they have lung trees growing all over the place. He said that other medical centers had been calling to find out about the operation and that some wanted to send COVID-19 patients to Northwestern for lung transplants. I want to emphasize that this is not for every COVID patient. I think that's well understood, but still, communication is key, doctor. You are correct. We are talking about patients who are relatively young, very functional, with minimal to no comorbid conditions, with permanent lung damage who can't get off the ventilator. For such patients, he said, the news of a successful transplant absolutely could start something. And that's a very good, vague way of putting it, I guess. without raising hopes too much. He also said doctors were closely monitoring COVID-19 survivors who had been on ventilators with severe lung damage to see whether they recover fully or have scarring in the lungs that might eventually lead them to also need transplants. Another good warning for the long term, right? Now, look, the survival rate is pretty good. The death rate is not as horrible as everybody thought. And now instead, in 5 years, we have 50,000 20-somethings on the lung transplant list. That's not a fantastic recovery. The patient's name is being withheld to protect her privacy, and her family has declined to be interviewed, said a Northwestern spokeswoman. Do you need to know the name of this Northwestern spokeswoman? It's not that easy to pronounce. Jenny Nowatzki, in case you want to know. She said the woman was Hispanic, a professional in her late 20s who lives and works in Chicago and had recently moved there from... Yeah, all you bigots, stop it. It's not Mexico. It's North Carolina. Jeez, come on. She was healthy before she contracted the coronavirus, Dr. Barat said. She had a minor illness that required her to take a medication that suppressed her immune system somewhat, but it was not clear whether the drug made her especially vulnerable to the virus. There's always something, though. She was ill for about 2 weeks before being admitted to the hospital on April 26th. Soon she needed a ventilator. Her condition kept worsening, and doctors connected her to a machine that pumps oxygen directly into the bloodstream. Different. Also very interesting. Weeks passed with no improvement, then the lung damage began to put a strain on her heart and liver. It became clear that her lungs would never recover, Dr. Barat said. You got someone in their 20s, otherwise healthy. This poor girl. The whole team felt it's hard to let someone... How come the break music isn't going? I don't know. Well, we're going to have to figure that one out. There we go. For some reason, I had to press the resume all button. Anyway, we're going to be a little bit off in the music, but I'll try and take the break at the right time. Poor girl here. The whole team felt it's hard to let someone go like that. That's a problem all the doctors are facing. We wanted to give her every option. Everybody was just rooting for her. So it sounds like a very narrow band of coronavirus folks that can benefit from this. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I've just scrolled down in the article a little bit here, and our music is going to roll a little extra here today. But boy, I mean, I guess you had to include this just out of interest in, all right, well, I mean, how damaged, I mean, I don't know. I don't really very often just say, show me a lung, like a good healthy lung that's just out there. Because, most often lungs are covered up by people's bodies. And you can see x-rays and such and various images, but they don't very often take out healthy lungs, except in anatomy class, I guess, and I haven't gone, and say, here's what a lung should look like. But I imagine it shouldn't look like this. This looks like a piece of bacon, quite honestly. It's really actually, if you're squeamish, I guess don't look. But this is an actual picture of one of the lungs removed from the patient. The surgeon said the damage was among the worst he'd seen. So a healthy 20-something gets this coronavirus, and, it's not going to happen to everybody, but it's no joke. And I imagine, I don't know how early on in the pandemic she got this, but I wonder if at some point she was saying, well, I'm 20-something. It could be 29. 21 is different from 29, but still, you must have been thinking, the odds are good, but, wow, I'm really having some trouble here. All right, well, let's see. Ill for 2 weeks before being admitted to the hospital. We read about that. And this was admitted to the hospital on April 26th. So I think by that time we were all pretty well aware of the potential dangers. All right, so previously the doctor had said he and his colleagues had debated what they would do if they had a young patient with irreversible lung damage. They had heard of such cases at other centers where care was withdrawn and the patients died. It seemed reasonable to try a lung transplant, though. Northwestern Medicine performs 40 or 50 of these a year. Dr. Barat says he does most of them, and the patient was put on the waiting list for a transplant only after she tested negative for the coronavirus. She had to actually recover and get the virus out of her system, obviously, before they would... You can't just give her a pair of new lungs and then say the virus that did this to her old lungs is just hanging around waiting for some fresh lungs to infect. So her body managed to do that much. Again, like I was saying, although I may have been cut off at the last second on our way into the break because of the awkwardness of the music being off, it sounds like a very narrow band of people suffering from coronavirus who can put any hope in this surgery. You have to have recovered. I mean, you have to survive the virus and then get yourself on a waiting list. A matching donor was quickly identified, and a few days later, the young woman underwent the operation. She was the sickest patient to whom he had ever given a transplant, he said, and her lung damage was among the worst he'd ever seen. A pathologist who examined the lungs confirmed that the damage was irreversible. Researchers are studying them in hopes of learning more about the disease to help answer one of many unanswered questions, Dr. Barat said. And that question is, what is the failure of repair mechanisms in the human that makes someone get to this point? That's an odd way of phrasing it, but I guess it's a very specific question. The patient must take immune-suppressing drugs now, this is a risk, to prevent her body from rejecting the transplant. Those, of course, can increase the risk of infection, hopefully not of coronavirus again, but wow. The patient has already been tested several times to see if the drugs could somehow have reactivated the coronavirus, but so far those tests have been negative, and that's good news, and I don't know if that's a thing that can happen, but I guess they're testing for every eventuality, and I suppose if you've invested that much in a patient like that, you test everything and guess at the possibilities or probabilities of anything weird like that happening, and you want to try and guarantee against it. Okay, let's see. Other things that I have in pocket that require our attention. This is a new one. Lots of writing in the papers and in the legal blogs about a development yesterday that I know Armando was very much excited about, but let's see. Well, I don't know. He hasn't been. I don't know. I suppose again, if he kicks the door down, there's nothing I can do. But he was very excited about seeing this news in the Flynn case. You may recall when we last left international super spy Michael Flynn. He had somehow become the beneficiary of a new push in the Justice Department out of nowhere to drop the charges against him. We did read, oddly enough, a few days ago that his co-conspirator in those charges, the Justice Department was very ready to prosecute, and they were absolutely going forward and pressing for his prosecution, even as they explained that this person was being prosecuted for committing crimes while employed by a company that had Flynn's name on it and at Flynn's direction. That guy's ready to go down, but Flynn will be pardoned eventually, probably by the president anyway, and I guess that's what's part of what's driving the Justice Department to say, well, maybe we can spare the president the embarrassment of having to pardon Flynn, even though he'll view it as an opportunity to look tough and resolute, and I'm going to do what I want to do no matter what, and nobody can stop me. But maybe we can spare him the bad publicity that will go along with it among the doubters of America by not convicting him at all. This despite the fact that Flynn has pleaded guilty twice to the very crimes with which he's charged, but now wants to withdraw that plea. And you remember the complicated legal stance that the Justice Department, the prosecutors in this case, said we no longer want to prosecute this case. And so ordinarily there's really not a whole lot that anybody can do. If nobody's willing to come in and prosecute the case, the court usually won't stand there and say, well, we'll prosecute it. They just say, well, if you bring me a case, I'll judge it. But if nobody brings me a case, I can't judge anything. So what do you do? It wasn't as easy as all of that. And we learned that the judge, because the pleas had been entered, the guilty pleas had been entered, the judge was afforded the opportunity to say, well, I've got all I need here to just move to sentencing, so I'm just going to do that. And I don't have in order for the Justice Department to get the charges dismissed, they have to make a motion to dismiss those charges, and that motion has to be granted by the judge. And if the judge doesn't grant it, well then, I guess they can go do a piss poor job of prosecuting and hope to lose the case and hope that the judge accepts that, but it's not clear that he has to accept that either. It's one of those extraordinary cases. So what did the judge do? He appointed a another former judge and former prosecutor, experience on both sides of this. Both sides all three sides, I guess, would include defense work, but I don't know whether they actually have that experience. But ask this former prosecutor and former judge, please brief me, since the Justice Department won't, on what issues might stand in the way of my granting this motion. Right? The defense attorneys aren't going to brief the judge on, well, what if you just continue prosecuting my client? And the prosecutors aren't going to do it because they want to drop it. You got to bring in somebody else. In the interest of justice, our adversarial system requires zealous arguments be presented on both sides of this, and neither of the two sides now in front of me will make a zealous argument against granting this motion. Judge, why don't you help me with that? And we have some answers about how they will approach that. And some writing about it, explanatory writing that'll help us catch up on it. Let's see. I have, who have I got on this? One, I've got Tierney Sneed tweeting here on behalf of TPM. Breaking, former judge appointed as friend of the court in Michael Flynn debacle torches DOJ in filing, arguing that the charges should not be dismissed and that Flynn should be sentenced for lying to the FBI. And then we have the TPM article on that subject. Is that what I actually have next to it in pocket? Yes. All right, we can read that one. And then I have, let's see, who else is, we have from friend of the show and frequent listener Patrick Snyder sends me what he says is a good thread on Gleason, that's the judge, the friend of the court. Gleason's takedown of the corrupt William Barr and the notorious spy and traitor Michael Flynn. Well put here. I will note for the record, whether we read this thread or not, it is from Eric Garland, who a lot of you know and appreciate, but a lot of you know and hate as the Time for Some Game Theory guy. So he's got mixed reviews, I think, among our crowd. But it's a good thread, we're assured by Patrick, and I believe him. And it should be exciting anyway. Let's see. And there's also a New York Times piece about this as well. Outsider tapped in Flynn case calls Justice Department reversal a gross abuse of power. So where do we want to start? Why don't we do the TPM one? Because they were first out of the box and everyone loves Tierney Sneed. And I don't know. Sounds like it's plausible, right? Lots of people probably do. I think it's always fun. All right, let's see. Did she write the piece or was she just tweeting it? Get the pop-up out of the way. Tierney Sneed and Josh Kovensky. Well, we probably will all come to love Josh Kovensky, too. I don't know who he is, but that may be on me. The judge presiding for Michael Flynn's case was told by the former prosecutor he appointed to advise him that he should deny the Justice Department request and move toward sentencing Flynn. Hooray. I like that. The former prosecutor found that the DOJ had committed a gross abuse of prosecutorial power in moving to drop the charges against Flynn. I want to make a note here, by the way. I should find Armando's tweet about this because he was saying he just straight up loved the brief because the brief came right out and said Barr is crooked in all of this, and this should be real exciting. I'm sorry, I almost forgot the end of the sentence. The DOJ had committed a gross abuse of prosecutorial power in moving to drop the charges against Flynn, and that its explanation for doing so was pretextual. But it gets more explicit than that, as I understand. John Gleason, who is also a retired judge, told U.S. District Judge Emmett Sullivan that the Justice Department's reasons for wanting the case dismissed were contradictory and were disproven by previous filings in the case. And that does appear to be true. They contradict and ignore this court's prior orders, which constitute the law of the case, Gleason said of the DOJ's new reasons for why the case should be dismissed. They are riddled with inexplicable and elementary errors of law and fact, which is a bad place to be ordinarily. Essentially he's saying they did a terrible job in making and briefing this motion for the dismissal. They came up with ideas that really just would get you an F in a law school essay exam. But why would they go forward with it? And the reason is because they just intend to overpower this judge. The judge wanted real reasons. They didn't have any. Gleason has caught them out here and identifying that they don't have any reasons that stand up to law and logic and reason. And they say, yes, but when you decide, therefore, not to dismiss the case because the law and logic and reason lead you to this inexorable conclusion, we will appeal and we will take it to a friendly court of judges that will comply with our wishes and dismiss the case, because if they don't, we will take it to the Supreme Court, where they definitely will, because we put that drunken a-hole on the court to throw everything off balance with this idea in mind. And he'll do it because we made his career and his life. Oh, well, okay, that's kind of a poor prognosis and a poor outlook, and maybe we can get around to electing someone else before this whole thing collapses, and then we can get a Department of Justice that won't press forward to the Supreme Court and get that ruling out of the justices. But it's a race against time. If you think it's really a super important thing that Mike Flynn goes to jail, and then he may get pardoned along the way anyway, like on the last day out. I imagine, I don't know whether he will do it right away, Trump, or he'll wait and make it dramatic and do it on January 20th at 11:59 or what. Anyway, yes, as Gleason said here, the reasons given for the dismissal of the case are contradict and ignore the court's prior orders, interesting terminology here, which constitute the law of the case. Do we understand pretty much what that means? I mean, I guess the best summary you can say is when the court that's handling the case issues orders, right, you can't just ignore those orders or say they're crap and we don't like them. That's the law of the case, and you're in big trouble if you just blow off the orders, unless you can get the orders reversed later on appeal, but as it stands, they haven't been reversed. That's the law of the case. This is how you're supposed to be proceeding in this case, and when you don't do it, you're subject to contempt of court findings, and a lot of others. But by the way, they do consider that, and I think they dismiss the necessity of proceeding in that direction. We'll read on. Gleason described the DOJ's explanations for dropping the case as not credible, saying that it was involved in corrupt, politically motivated dismissals. The government has engaged in highly irregular conduct to benefit a political ally of the president, Gleason wrote. He's quite correct. Gleason recommended to Sullivan that rather than initiate a separate contempt proceeding, because you're violating the law of the case, and violating my orders, rather than initiate a separate contempt proceeding against Flynn for perjury, which is against the law, and, you could do that, he should take into account Flynn's perjury during the sentencing in the underlying case. So all the punishment can still be heaped upon him, but you don't have to go through the trouble and time and expense of having a perjury or contempt of court proceeding. Okay, so let's see. This approach, rather than a separate prosecution for perjury or contempt, aligns with the court's intent to treat this case and this defendant in the same way it would any other, Gleason wrote. So non-controversial, except Trump and therefore Barr are against you, and so therefore they're going to make it a controversy. For Flynn, that would mean sentencing on the single felony count of false statements to which he pleaded guilty in December of 2017. Gleason ran through the history of the case against Flynn, noting pointedly that the focus of FBI officials' concern in the probe was counterintelligence related and not political, as the DOJ suggests in its motion to drop the charges. Russia was a geopolitical adversary that had just interfered with the American electoral process. Yet Flynn was quietly making conciliatory overtures that undercut the just-announced measures intended to convey the seriousness with which the United States regarded that incursion, Gleason wrote. Gleason also emphasized in the filing Trump's own promises to Flynn, purportedly made on the day of his February 2017 resignation from the position of National Security Advisor. On Flynn's final day, the president hugged him, can't do that anymore, and said, "You're a good guy. We'll take care of you," the filing reads. In his resignation letter, Flynn thanked Trump for his personal loyalty. The next day, Trump began working personally to avert any criminal investigation of Flynn's conduct, Gleason concluded. Citing the judiciary's independent interest in the integrity of its own proceedings and the need to protect the public from gross abuses of prosecutorial discretion, Gleason argued that Sullivan had the authority to reject the motion to dismiss and should do so. The reason judges are able to reject prosecutorial attempts to drop charges, Rule 48A in the Rules of Criminal Procedure, was to establish a judicial check on the corrupt, politically motivated dismissal of criminal charges. This was the fundamental reason given for limiting prosecutorial powers to dismiss cases, Gleason wrote. You can see how that easily see how that would be the case. Gleason argued that the judiciary itself had an interest in protecting the untainted administration of justice. Yes, you would think they would have that interest. An interest that was imperiled, Gleason argued, by the Justice Department's motion to drop the charges. These interests are imperiled if the executive branch seeks the dismissal of criminal charges for corrupt, politically motivated reasons that undermine confidence in the integrity of the judicial process, he wrote. Protect that third branch. For cases, however, where nobody opposed the motion to dismiss, Gleason maintained that corrupt, irregular conduct on the part of the government is enough to warrant the court rejecting the motion. Beyond that, the former judge argued, rescinding the charges post-plea could implicate Sullivan's own sentencing authority. The reasons offered by the government are so irregular and so obviously pretextual that they are deficient, Gleason wrote. Moreover, the facts surrounding the filing of the government's motion the facts surrounding the filing of the government's motion constitute clear evidence of gross prosecutorial abuse. Gleason added that the reasons for dismissal are directly and decisively disproven by the government's own briefs filed just months ago in this very proceeding, before homing in on the damage to Sullivan's authority on the case. They are also plainly inconsistent with prior orders of this court, which constitute law of the case. Gleason described the underlying case against Flynn as, quote, about as straightforward a case of materiality as a prosecutor, court, or jury will ever see in terms of the false statements Flynn made. Of course, remember that the government's argument for dropping the case is that the false statements are not material and never were, and that his activities were never material and they shouldn't have been investigating him in the first place. But he says, well, no, it's about as straightforward as it could possibly be. Two very different opinions there. Throughout his argument for why Flynn committed a crime and should therefore be sentenced, Gleason emphasized the point that all of the arguments he made in favor of Flynn's guilt were, just months earlier, the same ones made by the government that Gleason currently opposes. Not only did the government all make these arguments, but the court has already agreed with them, Gleason noted at one point. He went on to address the DOJ's argument, buttressed by years of conspiracy mongering in the right-wing media, that the FBI was about to close the Flynn investigation. This is what the DOJ says. The FBI was about to close the Flynn investigation, but for an administrative delay that allowed the Obama administration to keep the case going. Suppose any other defendant in a false statement case demanded disclosure of whether the agency at one point thought about closing the investigation, Gleason wrote. Even if the defendant had not already pled guilty before one judge and reaffirmed that allocution under oath before another, the government would scoff at those demands and this court would summarily deny them. Gleason also took swipes at Flynn while arguing against the DOJ's notion, you think, or motion? Motion, probably, that Flynn was, no, it is notion. That's right. Interesting. Well, that's confusing. But Gleason took swipes at Flynn while arguing against the DOJ's argument that Flynn was entrapped. But notion does help undermine the strength of the argument here. It's not even an argument. It's just kind of a notion, right? It's not supported by anything. So notion does a lot of work here. He's arguing against the DOJ's notion that Flynn was entrapped, because there's no proof or really any reason to believe it, noting one doesn't need to be a senior national security official entrusted with the nation's secrets to know not to lie to the FBI. Gleason also argued that the Justice Department had committed obvious prosecutorial misconduct in moving to drop the case to benefit a confidant of the president's, warranting denial of the motion. President Trump today has the unreviewable authority to issue a pardon, thus ensuring that Flynn is no longer prosecuted and never punished for his crimes because he's a friend and political ally, Gleason wrote. But the instant the executive branch filed a criminal charge against Flynn, it forfeited the right to implicate this court in the dismissal of that charge simply because Flynn is a friend and a political ally of the president. Finally, Gleason argued that Flynn met all the standards for contempt of court, but that Sullivan should not initiate a separate prosecution for it. Rather, the former judge held, Sullivan should consider the contemptuous conduct in sentencing on the offense of conviction. Gleason argued that Flynn's decision to back out of his plea agreement had not only derailed the proceedings, forcing the court to suspend the briefing schedule and cancel the sentencing, but also reflected brazen gamesmanship on challenging the integrity of the judicial system. Beyond that, Gleason maintained that Sullivan had the ability to appoint a private prosecutor because the government had already indicated that it would decline to prosecute. But, Gleason argued, Sullivan should not order Flynn to explain why he didn't commit perjury, in part because the best response to Flynn's perjury is not to respond in kind. Ordering a defendant to show cause why he should not be held in contempt based on a perjurious effort to withdraw a guilty plea is not what judges typically do, Gleason wrote, adding that Sullivan should attempt to return regularity to the judicial process. Flynn and the Justice Department are trying to get Flynn's case dismissed. Sullivan had initially balked, given the extraordinary circumstances of the matter. And you can read the entire friend of the court filing submitted on Wednesday by John Gleason, who was appointed by Sullivan as a friend of the court. Below is what it says here in TPM. So if you follow our link that we'll provide you in the summary of today's show, you can, if you wish, spend time with all 82 pages of the brief. And I'm told it's a pretty good read, too. Let's see if there's some interesting additional things that can be teased out of this from the Eric Garland tweet that Patrick sent us here. All right, let's see. It says, here we go, typical starting point for an Eric Garland tweet thread. Boom! In all caps and with an exclamation point and 3 fire emojis. Legendary mob prosecutor, I didn't know that, Judge Gleason, recommends sentencing Flynn, and then 3 of those smiley faces with the sunglasses on. Everything about this is irregular, comes the attached Politico piece. Everything about this is irregular. Ex-judge tapped to review Flynn case. What does it say here? I've got to go and read the whole headline. Blasts Trump DOJ. The retired judge Don Gleason said the Justice Department had improperly bowed to the president's will. Well, we don't necessarily need to read the Politico account of this. Let's see what Garland has to say. Let's start with the good stuff, he says, and he's going to have a couple of screenshots from the various coverages and from the brief itself, along with some interpretation. Let's start with the good stuff. Gleason, his interpretation of this conclusion here from the brief. The conclusion of the brief says, for the foregoing reasons, the court-appointed amicus curiae respectfully submits that the government's motion to dismiss should be denied and no order to show cause why Flynn should not be held in criminal contempt should issue. That's very dry, but what does Gleason have to say, or rather Garland have to say about it? His interpretation is that means Gleason is saying Barr can get bent, Flynn can head for prison. Boom. Then a bunch of smiley faces and more fire emojis. It's a little overwrought, but okay. On the issue of Rule 48, which says a judge has to approve getting rid of a plea deal from the prosecutor's side, his interpretation of what's being said here is, dude, this is a BS argument, although he uses the full word, even for people who buy BS arguments on the regular. What's he grabbed here? by way of screenshot. Let's see what the more formal dry language is. First, the requirement of judicial approval entitles the judge to obtain and evaluate the prosecutor's reasons. That's true. Cites precedent for that. Here, the government's statement of reasons for seeking dismissal is pretextual. The government claims there is insufficient evidence to prove materiality and falsity, but even giving it the benefit of every doubt and recognizing its prerogatives to assess the strength of its own case, this contention taxes the credulity of the credulous, citing Maryland versus King from 2013. Wow, that is some dry material. Eric Garland certainly giving it a more interesting, modern bent here. This is BS, and even BS buyers shouldn't buy it. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue on just for fun in the Eric Garland thing. I think what I'll have to do here is skip the screenshots of the dry language, although it is very interesting to hear how the how Gleason puts it in lawyerly terms, and then what does that mean from Eric Garland. But Eric Garland does tend to go on a bit in these threads, and he does here too. So I guess rather than reading you the dry stuff and leaving it to you to read the dry stuff, or you can settle for Eric Garland's interpretation of it, or maybe you want to do the reading for yourself just to see whether Garland is right about these things. Here's what we've got. We left off saying that on the issue of Rule 48, which says the judge has to approve getting rid of a plea deal from the prosecutor's side, Gleason says this is I guess we can just go ahead, but let's make it fun and interpret things one way. It's a BS argument, even for people who buy BS arguments on the regular. And by BS, I mean Barr is putting out some seriously stupid BS and not just regular BS. This makes the Chewbacca defense from South Park look elegant by comparison. You wonder how that could possibly be put in lawyerly fashion. But a screenshot is provided. And by the way, he then at this point says, here's a fun thing. On a side note, I love this guy's videos, and this is one of his best episodes. And it is a YouTube episode entitled Real Lawyer Reacts to South Park Chewbacca Defense. I guess this is supposed to be what a real lawyer would say in court if presented with the Chewbacca defense, which I guess is kind of a funny idea. Now, second, Garland continues. This not only regular BS, it's some dirty BS, not just stupid BS. Barr and the guy who no longer works for the DOJ, Shea, submitted some dirty, stupid BS. Damn, that's what I'm told. And then, what was that about? Let's see. Leave of court should not be granted when the explanation the government puts forth is not credible and as the real reasons for its dismissal of a criminal charge. Second, the court should deny leave because there is clear evidence of a gross abuse of prosecutorial power. Rule 48A was designed to guard against dubious dismissals of criminal cases that would benefit powerful and well-connected defendants. In other words, exactly what's going on here. Then Garland continues with some wild laughter and a quote taken directly out of the screen grab here. On the new perjury charges thing, not a quote, his interpretation again, but there's an underlined part here which says you should take perjury into account in sentencing, right? On the new perjury charges thing, maybe just don't give him a break on the prison time since he got up to this stupid, dirty BS. No need for a separate court thing. He finds that hilarious. Let's see. You all remember this about treason, right? Not just lying, but lying about treason, right? And this is offered as background. And here, I guess maybe it pays to read this screen grab just to remind us of it was Judge Sullivan, remember, was the one who was asking, why didn't you end up charging him with treason, right? You remember that one. In July 2016, the organization WikiLeaks made public a trove of emails taken from the DNC. U.S. intelligence officials had previously identified the Russian government as responsible for the hack and later assessed that Russia was considering further intelligence operations to impact or disrupt the upcoming elections. That's taken from the background of the case as offered up in Gleason's filing. But good pull here. It's worth remembering that in the initial stages of the sentencing, or moving towards sentencing, once Flynn pled guilty, there was that question. I mean, I've read the facts of the case. It feels like just straight up treason. Why isn't that on the table here? Garland's thread continues. Here's his interpretation of what's going on here. See, if you all recall, the Trump administration was under counterintelligence investigation for treasoning with Russian intel, the intel operatives, for Russia in collusion with Russians. You know, treason by colluding with Russians, that thing. You know, because the whole mess was chock full of Russians, Russian mobsters, Russian spy mobsters, people who wanted to work with Russian mobster spies, so everyone got a counterintelligence investigation during the campaign. Bruh, as he says here. And you'll recall, I mean, this is important because, of course, the Trump people are all out. They insist that the fact that their campaign and operatives in their campaign were under counterintelligence investigation, they view this as, as Barr put it, this is the first time in history that the government apparatus has been used to spy on a campaign for president. That's their interpretation of it. And, of course, the rest of us look at it as, well, this is the first time that a campaign for president has colluded with a foreign power to manipulate the results of the election. So, yes, there was a counterintelligence investigation. There should be a counterintelligence investigation into any effort to plant a Russian puppet in the United States presidency. That's obvious, but not to them. And I guess that's really what's at the heart of all this. Anyway, chief among these fools was Mike Flynn, who was not only a balalaika-playing idiot with a mouthful of caviar and vodka wearing a fur hat with a red star on it, he also still had his U.S. security clearance, which was bad, is his interpretation of this next section of the brief. Anyway, Obama sanctioned Russia for attacking our democracy, and it was weird. Moscow didn't really react the way they normally do. The U.S. intelligence community was trying to figure out why Putin was so chill, and then they found out why. Because Moscow Mike Flynn was making his own foreign policy against the foreign policy of the President of the United States at the time. Hoo boy! Well, yeah, that's kind of how we understood the case. While on the phone with the Russian ambassador, Kislyak, he also tried to F up Obama's policies at the UN on behalf of Benjamin Netanyahu. Nasty. True also. Flynn, we're reminded here in all caps and one word at a time in the word per sentence format. Flynn worked in partnership with Russia while Obama was president. They did what Flynn said, so Russia could profit at our expense. The U.S. intelligence community was like, hell no, according to Garland here. Next, then, this was seriously effed up. Russia just attacked us. Flynn was helping them out, and Flynn even knew that he was turning traitor. Well, that told the FBI that they were on the right trail with this fool. And another note from Garland here saying, I wonder how these oral arguments for the D.C. Circuit Court case to shut all of this down on Friday are coming. I didn't realize that was coming up. Or maybe they figured, maybe he's just guessing ahead. Once Gleason made his filing, it was plain that the DOJ should be working on appeals at that point. Flynn knew he was caught and tried to get the transition team of idiots to cover up for him, which we prosecutors and judges call consciousness of guilt for all of them. More Garland here. Oh, another reminder. The above mentioned K.T. McFarland in this screen grab that accompanies the previous comment. K.T. McFarland admitted on transition emails that they all knew Russia gave Trump the election win. So this makes it all much worse. Let's see. What is that screen grab? Is McFarland mentioned in this one? Or is it in one of the previous ones? I guess it's in a previous one. But interesting, and backed up again with screen grabs. Let's see. Oh, he says, looks like Sean Spicer is effed too. Interesting. Once Sean Spicer started lying about the Russia-Flynn contacts in public, the FBI was like, damn, we have a treason problem and a Russian blackmail problem in the incoming White House. They had to hustle. How is that put in lawyerly terms? I am kind of curious about that one. Other incoming officials repeated the denial in the ensuing days. On the January 13, 2017 briefing, incoming press secretary Sean Spicer publicly stated that the post-Christmas call between Flynn and Kislyak centered around the logistics of setting up a call between Putin and Trump, and that was it, plain and simple. On January 15th, Priebus and Vice President-elect Mike Pence were asked about the calls during a national television interview. Both vouched that they had talked to General Flynn, who had assured them that the sanctions never came up in the conversations with Kislyak. These new developments add new dimensions, as well as newfound urgency to the FBI's ongoing investigations and the intelligence community's counterintelligence concerns. Flynn had lied to multiple incoming White House officials and concealed the true nature of his contacts with the Russian government. In addition to that obvious concern, the Russians would likely have evidence of those lies, and as a result would have secret leverage over the incoming national security advisor. Bad on top of bad. Right, okay. As soon as Flynn took over as National Security Advisor, Garland continues, right after his texting his buddies about getting the Middle East a bunch of U.S. nuclear technology, the FBI wanted a word. The FBI was over there in a couple hours, and Flynn not only acted like it was no big thing, the fool even pretended like he thought Russia was our enemy. The FBI special agents asked about whether Flynn, supposedly an intel guy, remembered conspiring with Russia for Netanyahu while on consumer electronics in a foreign country, like a mouth-breathing dolt. And he came up with some BS. Flynn, a moron, lied his ass off about all the Russian sanctions stuff as well. The Gleason brief argues. FBI and DOJ were like, damn, that fool Flynn just won a brand new shiny 18 U.S. Code Section 1001 charge. Sally Yates went over from DOJ to warn them idiots at the White House about Flynn. She got fired immediately, but they were still worried about how messy this would get. Moscow Mike then quits to avoid any more blowback, not because he was sorry or anything, and Trump and Flynn then exchanged some mob agreements about obstructing justice and getting Flynn off. That two-bit Genovese money bitch Trump, that's what it says, then started trying to obstruct justice by leaning on Comey, the director of the FBI, of course, who he soon fired. Trump has tried to get Flynn off the hook ever since. Mueller came on board, and he flipped Flynn in no time, because of course he did. He had the Flipmaster General, Andrew Weissman, on board. Flynn said he'd turn rat on the Russia thing. And another Eric Garland note here. After almost 4 years, can I tell you what a joy it is to write this thread based on the work of one of the most respected federal judges? No unhinged conspiracy theory here. This is straight up chain of evidence, son. And I think, does it go on for much longer? Let's see. No, I think now we're into replies from everybody else. Oh, no, maybe there is. It parked them above rather than below where I was reading. So plenty more here. Hold on just a second. I got to scroll way back up here. Mueller came on board. Right, okay. Flynn turned rat on his co-conspirators, admitted he committed all kinds of felonies, and got a sweet deal of pleading to a tiny little Section 1001 charge, lying to the FBI. Now another whoa moment with a lot of fire emojis. Flynn admitted that he was screwing with the FBI investigation and admitted he was also a spy for Turkey and Erdogan. Though he was never charged for that, by the way, we should point that out. Flynn pleaded out like any other felon. Then Flynn started this current kamikaze BS, pretending like maybe he didn't plead for real. Moron. Once Flynn had to pop the spies for Turkey, probably making Giuliani and Michael Mukasey nervous, he then tried to pretend that he never turned rat, and then he got back to his normal BS. Then Moscow Mike tried to unguilty plea himself using the classic, but it's not fair because my son's a traitor too defense. That's interesting, which is less coherent than the Chewbacca defense. Later, Bill Barr stuck his goon into the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office and tried to unguilty plea Flynn based on a writ of habeas, WTF, which they invented specifically for this case. Interesting. Not even sure what he's talking about there. To sum up, here's why to tell Barr to jam it. This looks like corrupt, irregular conduct from the faux DOJ. Judge Gleason goes into beast mode, we're told. Now, let's cut to the chase. This is the stupidest, dirtiest BS we've ever seen in court, and it's all for that Genovese money launderer Trump. Barr says that can't prove Flynn lied. That he can't prove Flynn lied. Is he effing kidding? Asks Gleason's brief here, according to Garland. Precedent teaches us to ask, does Bill Barr honestly think we're all born yesterday? Seriously? Barr also tries to argue that the Flynn thing is no big deal. Head of an intel agency goes to Russia Today gala, sits with Putin, conspires with spies, then lies about it during the most important investigation in history. Are you kidding? Bottom line, Flynn lies to the FBI about a counterintelligence investigation where he is the subject. That's a crime. This nonsense from Barr is the biggest horse crap in DOJ history. Again, because Barr is terrible at this, Flynn lied to the FBI. There's a law against that. He's guilty. He even said so. So sentence his ass. Oh yeah, don't forget this transparent BS of trying to slime the counterintelligence investigators. It's a crock and everybody knows it. And another thing, they tried to entrap Flynn boo-hoo crap. The FBI had the transcripts. Flynn lied anyhow. What a moron. Yes, they had the transcripts of the call with Kislyak, and apparently that was somehow a surprise to them. I don't really know how that could possibly be. Now, the thread goes on for some time here, but quite honestly, Garland, I guess, has been following this a lot more closely than most, and the more I think about it, the more insidery and tongue-in-cheek all his references are, the less helpful and informative it actually becomes. I think we still need more good, solid, straight-up background and a good source of all of that. Not that we have the time to read it any longer. Charlie Savage at the New York Times, along with Adam Goldman. But Charlie Savage, certainly a trusted source in all this. Adam Goldman I'm less familiar with, but he's been following all sorts of national security-related happenings since way back in the George W. Bush administration. And their, I think, somewhat more sober analysis would probably be helpful in all of this. So I'll refer you to that and move on from the subject. It's a very passionate explanation of things, but yeah, I think on balance, I'm sorry, Patrick, but Eric Garland is just not on my list of helpful, credible analysis or analysts of this or pretty much any other situation. He lives to entertain himself, as do I, but, it only works for him, and maybe my brand only works for me, I guess. That's about it. I think I gotta have to abandon it at that point. All right, let's see. Definitely about 10 other stories that I haven't been able to get to yet that we probably should. This should probably be highlighted at some point, don't you think? We'll use CNN's explanation of this story because they're in the middle of it. Trump campaign demands CNN apologize for poll that shows Biden leading. Yeah, that was a hell of a headline, and I think they got plaudits from this from, was it Greg Sargent, who was so interested in the way they did it, or maybe it was possibly Josh Marshall. I did see a lot of backslapping on that one. Let's see. One have here. Oh, Harry Enton is got the byline, and I mentioned his name first, even though it's listed second, because the first name presents a pronunciation issue. Veronica Stracquilursi. How about that? Stracquilursi. That's long, but I don't think it's all that difficult to say, if I got that right. The two of them have this by way of explanation of that crazy headline. President Donald Trump's campaign is demanding CNN retract and apologize for a recent poll that showed him well behind presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden. These are, of course, the polls that we've been seeing all over the place, right? The demand coming in the form of a cease and desist letter. They actually got the lawyer to write a cease and desist letter to CNN, in fact, to President of CNN, Jeff Zucker, that contained numerous incorrect and misleading claims, and was immediately rejected by the network. They don't do a good job, Trump's lawyers, but they do a job. We stand by our poll, Matt Dornick, a CNN spokesman, said. The CNN poll conducted by SSRS, remember we heard about this one, and released on Monday, Greg told us about it, shows Trump trailing the former vice president by 14 points, 55-41 among registered voters. It also finds the president's approval rating at 38%, his worst mark since January of 2019, and roughly on par with the approval ratings for one-term presidents Jimmy Carter and George H.W. Bush at this point in their re-election years, and a disapproval rating of 57%. In the letter to Zucker, the Trump campaign argued that the CNN poll is, quote, designed to mislead American voters through a biased questionnaire and skewed sampling. It's an unskew the polls argument. It's a stunt and a phony poll to cause voter suppression. There's some projection for you. Stifle momentum and enthusiasm. Yes, you heard it.
Enthusiasms.
For the president, and present a false view generally of the actual support across America for the president, read the letter, signed by the Trump campaign senior legal advisor Jenna Ellis and chief operating officer Michael Glassner. The campaign formally requested that CNN retract the poll and publish a full, fair, and conspicuous retraction, apology, and clarification to correct its misleading conclusions. David Vigilante, how do you like that? CNN's executive vice president and general counsel, so he's not acting as a vigilante, that's just his name, told the campaign that its allegations and demands are rejected in their entirety. To my knowledge, this is the first time in its 40-year history that CNN has been threatened with legal action because an American politician or campaign did not like the CNN polling results. Vigilante wrote in his response, to the extent we have received legal threats from political leaders in the past, they've typically come from countries like Venezuela or other regimes where there is little or no respect for a free and independent media. After CNN released the poll earlier this week, Trump tweeted that he had hired Republican pollster McLaughlin and Associates to analyze the survey and others, which I felt were fake based on the incredible enthusiasm we are receiving. That's the actual Trump tweet. I mean, wow. McLaughlin ranks as one of the least accurate pollsters in the country, as measured by 538, by the way. But several other polls released over the past few weeks, including polls by ABC News, Washington Post, Monmouth University, NPR, PBS NewsHour, Marist College, NBC News, Wall Street Journal, Quinnipiac University, and Fox News also show Biden well ahead of Trump. Well, remember, he's abandoning Fox News these days. He is all in for OANN instead. These polls, average with the CNN poll, find Biden up by double digits, a result well outside of any margin of error. The campaign's letter, which heavily cites findings by McLaughlin, makes several incorrect and misleading claims. It's a poll of 1,259 adults, not even registered voters, let alone likely voters, the letter says, citing a McLaughlin memo from earlier in the week. While it's accurate that 1,259 adults were reached on landlines or cell phones by a live interviewer for the survey, the 14-point margin of error by which Trump is trailing Biden came from a question posed only to 1,125 registered voters. It's typical for polling to sample registered voters rather than likely ones at this stage of the race, as it's difficult to project whether voters will participate in an election that is 5 months away. CNN, as do most public pollsters, typically reports results from likely voters around Labor Day. It should be noted that in CNN's poll, Biden expands his lead among those who are most, i.e. extremely, enthusiastic to vote. McLaughlin says CNN's survey is a skewed anti-Trump poll of only 25% Republican. That percentage of respondents, however, is consistent with several other major polls that use live telephone interviews, which provide the most reliable snapshot of the race. McLaughlin this week argued that pollsters should include a third of Republicans in surveys to reflect the 33% that they represented in the 2016 vote. But exit polls nearly always have higher shares of partisans and lower shares of independents than pre-election phone polls. Among the entire sample, 32% identified themselves in CNN's polls as Democrats, 25% identified them as Republican, and 44% described themselves as independents or belonging to another party. Results for the full sample have a margin of sampling error of plus or minus 3.4 percentage points. It is 3.6 points among registered voters, because there was a smaller sample of registered voters, right? The letter to Zucker also includes McLaughlin's criticism that the poll conducted between June 2nd and 5th was taken before the great economic news, an improvement in the jobless rate that was released on Friday, even though the poll was still being conducted throughout that day. And, of course, then we found out that the jobless numbers were wrong anyway. And the survey comes amid an especially turbulent time in Trump's presidency, including the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, outrage and concern over race relations in the wake of George Floyd's killing, and the U.S. officially entering a recession. But we didn't find that out until after. But okay. McLaughlin has also argued that the poll unfairly includes questions on issues including race relations, not job creation, which could have biased the poll further. Though CNN's survey does ask registered voters who would be better at handling the economy. And Trump actually won that, by the way, but they probably threw those results out at the Trump campaign. Well, the whole thing's fake, right? No, they took those. Anyway, I mean, it's nuts. And should we even go any further with this? There's another Trump tweet here, I guess. Why doesn't Fox News put up the CNBC poll or the Believe It or Not CNN poll? Hope Roger Ailes, is looking down. He's not looking down. He's looking up and watching what has happened to his once beautiful creation. Well, anyway, look, Trump's lost his mind and he pays the lawyers. So I guess, he's contracted with the lawyers. He'll probably stiff them as well. And, they'll end up having done this out of their own pocket. I hope they're proud of themselves. All right, just a minute or two left here. I feel like I should scroll down and, there's an awful lot out there. There's enough for a very, I wish we were on the air Friday for our deep cuts stuff, but not going to be able to get to some of this other very interesting stuff that has grown out of the anti-statue activism. That's been very interesting. Let me, here we go. Here's a good 2-minute item to toss in there. Just a follow-up on the bicyclist who was caught on video assaulting the two teenage girls handing out Black Lives Matters flyers in Bethesda, Maryland. They have actually identified and made an arrest on the guy, and I don't know if we got to point that out. We thought that they were, I think when we left off, it was that internet sleuths had used biking app leads to identify a couple of suspects. They got the first one wrong, and they got a second one that I guess the local police agreed with and made an arrest on it. And it says here, cyclist arrested and fired from his job after allegedly assaulting teens posting anti-police brutality flyers. And that should be clear about that. It's not anti-police flyers, or anti-police brutality flyers. Of course, there's a mugshot accompanying it with a mask and everything, pulled down this time, though. Maryland authorities late last Friday arrested a 60-year-old believed to be the man depicted in a widely viewed video which showed a cyclist violently grabbing several teenagers who were putting up flyers protesting police brutality. And I guess now at this point we can say a name because there's been an arrest made. Not that that's always a fair thing to do either. I don't know. Should we skip it? I want to make the guy famous. Does it matter to you? The point is that they've identified somebody and actually made an arrest and gone as far as all of that. And that's good news. Also, probably good news is that I've seen one of the better nicknames assigned to the guy. Scott Charles, I think, was tweeting that around, saying he couldn't get it out of his head that they've been calling him, someone has anyway, calling him Bike Tyson. How do you like that one? Take that one to the bank. Anyway, he's been charged, and I guess we now sit and wait for the system to work itself out. But, let's see. What's the background of the guy? Do they share it in this one? Because I think that people were thinking that it was possible that the suspects that they had in mind might have been affiliated with either currently or in the past the police departments. And so maybe it would be difficult to trust the police to conduct this investigation and hand it off properly to the prosecutors. But it doesn't look like that's the case here with this guy. So that's out the window. And I'll leave you with that as I hand things over to Justice Putnam for today's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and tomorrow's as well. And ours, of course, will have to be a rerun as we are headed off to the doctor for that all-important colonoscopy. All of you who are on the hook for that ought to get on it to make sure that you get the check done. If I have to, you have to. That's my attitude, and that's about as valid a position as I can take on it here. Let's see what's coming up next on Justice Putnam's program. Here we are. We're going to start off with the Gleason news. Good. There'll be some better, more solid analysis provided on that one. We could always use more. Gleason, tasked with diving into the Flynn matter, has called Barr's move to drop the case corrupt and a gross abuse of prosecutorial power. We could always use more on that. And then, after that, Trump refuses to blame violence on far-right extremists who have been arrested for far-right extremist violence. And, that sort of leads to its own conclusion there. But okay, a majority of Americans want abortion to remain safe and legal, but far-right extremists, what do you know, on the Supreme Court this time, they don't care. And volunteers are working with the Smithsonian to save the White House fence protest art. That's
from Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, there's more, of course. How about this? Universally despised outgoing U.S. Ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell, defended Trump's troop withdrawal plan, everyone thinks is idiocy, and a project to name a Polish military base Fort Trump, has been toppled and dragged mercilessly. Boy, that's not going to help you, Poland.